Coming up next on At Issue, our topic will be ethics, and more specifically, ethical intelligence, with special guest Dr. Bruce Weinstein. Dr. Weinstein has made several appearances on national television, is a contributor to the Huffington Post, and author of Ethical Intelligence: 5 Principles for Untangling Your Toughest Problems at Work and Beyond. That's coming up next on At Issue, so don't go away. Thanks for joining us for At Issue. I'm your host, Lori Casey, and I'm so pleased to be joined by Dr. Bruce Weinstein, also known as the Ethics Guy. Now, you're here as part of our EIU School of Business Ethics and Social Responsibility series, so we want to thank you for taking time out to come over to the station and visit with us.
Absolutely, happy to do it.
Well, let's start. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I studied philosophy at Swarthmore College and loved it so much that I decided to get a PhD in it, and it turns out Georgetown University has a program with a concentration in bioethics. So a lot of graduates become professors in medical schools and dental schools, and that's exactly what I did once I got my wings in '89. For 6 years I was a professor at West Virginia University's medical school. And I loved it, and it was great, but I felt that I wanted the world to be my classroom. So I left in '95 and went off to South Africa to make a documentary about something completely different. But when I got back, I decided I really want to make a go of this and go around the world and talk about these things, but not limited to medical ethics or dental ethics or pharmacy ethics. So since, I guess, the late '90s, I've been traveling around the world, or as Jules would say from Pulp Fiction, walking the earth like Caine in Kung Fu, sort of, more peacefully, I hope. No, Caine was peaceful, but talking about this concept of ethical intelligence that I'm really excited about.
Well, let's talk about that. It's not just ethics. What is ethical intelligence in your mind?
Well, the reason why I like to use ethical intelligence is because I found the word ethics is as appealing to a lot of people as the words dental surgery. And when you think about it, when you hear the word ethics in the paper or hear about it in a PBS report, what word is it normally associated with? Ethics and what else? Violation.
Yes.
It's often associated with people who are doing the wrong thing, who are being punished. So there's this punitive sense that ethics has gotten, unfortunately, because really ethics, as I understand it, is about bringing out the best in ourselves and other people. And it's something that we ought to embrace because it's good for us. It's not something, you know, that we should swallow like a bitter pill. So I thought, if I use the word ethics, it's a turnout, but this concept of ethical intelligence I thought would be much more engaging, because most of us, especially viewers of a network like this, believe that we're intelligent and we'd like to become more intelligent. So I thought, well, the concept of emotional intelligence has been used successfully. This could be a complement to that. And that's what I've been developing.
So do you think ethics are, is it something we learn from our parents, or is it in our nature to be ethical, or how do people go off the wrong track and become unethical? You know,
it's a great question, and we learn ethics everywhere. We learn how to do the right thing from our parents, from teachers, if we're believers, from our houses of worship. But we also learn about ethics from the movies, from the TV shows we watch, and a lot of the moral lessons come from how not to live. For example, I mean, one of the most popular films of the last 30 years is Scarface, Brian De Palma's version of the Howard Hawks film. And a lot of people have made Tony Montana, the protagonist, into a hero because, you know, he has this rise to fame and fortune for much of the story, but they conveniently forget that he's killed by his own ambition by the end. So I think stories like The Sopranos and Scarface, Goodfellas, The Godfather teach us the dangers of living an immoral life, if we're willing to take the time to look carefully what the stories are telling us.
I mean, when you think about ethics, you think of medical ethics, legal ethics. You know, we have ethics, as a state of Illinois employee, we have to take an ethics test. Ethics is really all around us. It's something that hits us every day.
And in fact, if you go out on let's say that you're interested in meeting someone through an online dating service, and the person's photo appeals to you, and you set up a date and you meet them, and the person actually is 20 years older than their photograph. And you ask the person, "Now, wait a minute, why did you use a photo from 1985? Well, if I had a current picture, people wouldn't probably be as interested." Well, that's a form of unethical behavior. But we don't often think about ethics as having to applying to the world of romance. We think about, as you mentioned, medical ethics, legal ethics, but it applies in every interaction that we have, especially on a date.
Oh,
that's what most of us can relate to, much more than who gets the last liver or the last kidney.
That's right. You talk about.
Can I mention another dating dilemma
Sure,
here that's very common, and it actually is something that I bet everyone can relate to? Let's say that you're on a date and the bill comes and that expensive bottle of wine that you ordered is not on the bill. What's the right thing to do? And I actually went out with a woman many years ago before I'm married to my current wife, and this should have been the first red flag in this relationship, because when the bill came, she said, "Oh, I guess it was free. I guess it was a gift to us." And she was treating me, and I wasn't comfortable with it, but I went along with it. And it turned out to be a very good indicator of the kind of person she was, because somebody who's going to stiff a waiter or a restaurant is going to do other things, and it turned out to be the case. So ethics really is a part of everyday life.
Oh yeah, we just sometimes we gloss it over, but you have occasions like that. Oh, what's the right thing
That's
to
right.
do?
And anytime we ask what's the right thing to do, we're asking an ethical question.
I was reading your bio, and you said one of the keys to success in life is ethical intelligence. Can you expand a little bit on that?
It's true. Well, Daniel Goleman wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence, and he admits that he did not coin the term, but he's popularized it all over the world. And it's a very important part of living a good life. But it's not quite the same as ethical intelligence, and I'll tell you why. Let's say that you and I know each other pretty well, and we meet at the mall one afternoon, and we haven't seen each other for a while, and you say, "How are you doing, Bruce?" And I say, "I'm fine." I say I'm fine, but you know that I'm anything but fine.
Right.
Now, what clues would give you would lead you to come to the conclusion that I'm not fine? I say I'm fine, but I'm not. What would you be?
Maybe the way you look, just the tone of your voice. Maybe you've posted some things on social media that have kind of given us some clues that maybe things aren't going so well.
So it's through your emotional intelligence that you're able to perceive the difference between how I present to the world and what's really going on, because you're perceptive. You see how I'm feeling. You don't just take my words at face value. That's emotional intelligence. But then the question becomes, well, what should you do? Should you ask me right there at the mall, "Is something okay, Bruce?" Should you follow up with an email or a text? Should you forget about it? Should you call my wife? What's the right thing to do? Emotional intelligence will not and cannot help you there, because emotional intelligence is a psychological concept, is a phenomenon. And when you ask what's the right thing to do, you're asking an ethical question, and so we have to appeal to ethical principles, or what I call the principles of ethical intelligence, to help make the right decision. So we need both. To lead a fully human life, we need both emotional and ethical intelligence.
So when you're trying to think ethically, does the first question that come to mind start with what's the right thing to do?
That is the ethical. Yes, when you find yourself asking what's the right thing to do, as opposed to what's the easiest thing for me to do, what could I get away with? What can I do that will allow me to enrich myself? That's maybe a question we all ask ourselves, but it's not an ethical question.
Okay. I want to talk about, one of your books talks about these 5 principles for, I think, untangling difficult things in the workplace and in life. What are those 5 principles?
I'll tell you the 5 principles, and I'll preface this by saying I did not come up with them.
Okay.
I adapted them from a book called Principles of Biomedical Ethics that was written for the medical and scientific community. But these principles are common to all faiths, all religious traditions, all cultures. So I'm merely trying to popularize them, and I don't want people to think that I am claiming that I came up with them. But the 5 principles of ethical intelligence are: first, do no harm, the most fundamental principle of all. And we tend to associate that principle with the medical community. Because we know that in medical school, nursing school, dental school, pharmacy school, students are taught, first, do no harm. When you have a relationship with a patient, the goal is to help make him or her better, but at least don't make them worse. But when you think about it, doesn't that apply not just to physicians and pharmacists and dentists, but to TV producers and pundits and really everybody? It applies to students here at the university. It applies to everyone. The most fundamental principle. Number 2, make things better. it's not enough to avoid hurting people. Ethics calls upon us to go beyond what the law would require. And the do no harm principle is a legal as well as an ethical principle. But ethics demands more of us and tells us that we ought to use our skills and knowledge to make a positive difference in the lives of other people. The third principle is respect. Respect other people. And there are three powerful ways that we show respect in an ethical sense: by keeping confidential things confidential, by telling the truth, and by keeping our promises.
Okay.
Principle number 4, be fair. To give to others their due. And the fifth principle is the principle of compassion. It tells us that we ought to treat others and ourselves kindly, with care, with love. And those 5 principles are not a recipe or a formula, but they're a framework for helping us make the right decisions.
So do you think our society has we've spent less time thinking about these 5 principles before we make decisions?
You know, there's so much pressure on all of us. There are economic pressures, there are pressures on students to get into good schools, and it seems as though the temptations are greater than ever before, and possibly the actual conduct is worse than before. But there is a sense that our society has made some moral progress in some areas. I mean, for example, well, when I grew up in the late 60s, early 70s, I remember my teachers telling the class, girls, you can be a nurse or you can be a teacher. And that, I mean, there were occasionally where, you know, you'd hear about women in the legal profession, but mostly it was those 2 areas. We've gone far beyond that. I mean, the idea in 1968, if you had said, we're going to have several women on the U.S. Supreme Court, it would have been a pipe dream. People were hoping for that, but, you know, to actually imagine that happening was something that would have surprised a lot of people. There were segregated movie theaters and drinking fountains in this country. Slavery was legal. Women weren't allowed to vote for many years until 1921. So we don't have these prescriptions anymore. So in that sense, we've made, you know, some progress, but we certainly have a way to go before we consider ourselves a fully just society.
So what are, you gave 2 speeches here at Eastern. The first one was, I like this, if it's it's not cheating if I don't get caught.
Is it still cheating?
Is it still cheating if I don't get caught? What was kind of the premise of that speech?
I wanted to engage students by presenting 5 different scenarios in which they find themselves asking, what's the right thing to do? For example, you wake up with the flu. Is it okay to go to school when you have the flu or a cold? Is it okay to stay home and rest? Is it better to go to school but socialize only with the people you don't like? What's the right thing to do? This is something we find ourselves asking. So I presented 5 different scenarios, and I asked the students, how would you act in each scenario? And not surprisingly, in a group of 300 people, different people respond differently. But then the question is, what's the right thing to do? Are some responses better than others? And I said, I will show you that there are 5 principles that you already know that will help you make the right decisions in these situations and anytime you find yourself asking, what's the right thing to do? So we went through those principles, we had some interactive exercises, and we wrapped it up by, I showed how the principles point us in the right direction in the quiz that I presented at the beginning. And that was it.
So you did an evening speech. What was that focused on?
Yes, that I showed, I've done, not to toot my own horn, but I've done about 200 plus interviews on CNN, the Today Show, PBS. But my favorite one is an argument I had on Fox Business a while ago about the right to health care. And I decided I was not going to let them off the hook with the way they were abusing a particular word. And the segment was supposed to be 3 minutes. You know, unlike PBS, you have
the whole 20 half hour here.
But it was such a vigorous debate that they kept it going for 7 minutes. And I'm really proud of that discussion because I refused to be bullied by the host. And the second hour I showed that clip and then we had a discussion about it, about the intersection between business and journalism and ethics.
Well, you're here as part of the School of Business, and I think what comes up is, when you think of business, it's, do whatever you do to have to get ahead and, ethics. And what's your message to our student body or to anybody out there? When it talks, we are a society where we want to do better than our parents did and we want to get ahead in life. How do you balance that drive to do better with ethical responsibility?
It seems as though there's a conflict between doing the profitable thing on the one hand and doing the right thing. That you can either enrich yourself and your business or you can take the high road. In the short run, that may be true. I mean, Bernie Madoff literally made off with billions of dollars, but it caught up with him. Lance Armstrong, it caught up with him. Over and over again, we see how in the long run, people who take a shortcut and enrich themselves in the short run are eventually, their feet are held to the fire. So what I want to show people is that it's in your own, if all you're interested is doing right for your business and enriching the bottom line, these 5 principles are the best way to do it. Because when you ask yourself, what's the most valuable commodity that I can have in business? It's positive word of mouth. And you know, there are these websites like Fiverr. Have you heard about this? FIVERR.com.
Okay.
I have no financial stake, and in fact, I'm about to say something critical about that. But you can find people who for $5 will stand in line at Starbucks and talk about how great your company is.
Wow.
And so you know, if you're in Starbucks and you hear someone saying, wow, you know, that new candy bar is fantastic, and you might be tempted to get it, but if you taste it and it's horrible, the company has done well in the short run, but in the long run, you're going to get negative word of mouth, especially when people find out it was a ruse. So the best way to get positive word of mouth is by encouraging people to trust you. And the best way to develop trust is by striving to live by these principles of ethical intelligence, even though I recognize it's really hard to do this. It's extremely hard. And in fact, I give away Post-it notes with the 5 principles on. In fact, if any of your viewers want one, I will be happy to send them one if they email me. But if you keep these principles front and center, it reminds us that as difficult as it is, it's not only the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. It's the most commercial thing to do, if you will.
You had mentioned, you know, national headline news, Bernie Madoff, more recently Lance Armstrong. When something like that happens, when you see a major figure, let's use Lance Armstrong, everybody looked up to him, and then we as a society find like, oh, wow, it was all a lie. Do you think things like that kind of make us sit back and go, well, maybe getting ahead at any cost and throwing those ethics aside is not worth it? I don't want to say that's a good thing that happened, but do you think that makes us think as a society a little more about what's the right thing to do?
If we're smart, it will. And what I've suggested publicly is that Lance Armstrong could become a force for good now by using a significant portion of the rest of his life, and we hope, you know, that he has a long time to live, for talking with young people in this country and beyond, and to talk about what he did and why he did it. And if it's much more powerful than, you know, the ethics guy coming into a class and talking about why you shouldn't cheat. If you have a guy who says, I had it and I lost it all because I made really foolish choices, that could really make a positive difference. It could help steer kids, you know, to the right path. So we believe in this country and in other countries as well in redemption. That there are second acts in American lives, and not F. Scott Fitzgerald notwithstanding, but also this 5th principle of compassion calls upon us, I think, to look kindly, to recognize that yes, Lance Armstrong messed up, but we do too. And you know, there, but for the grace of God go I. So it's probably not a smart thing to be really harsh in thinking about a fellow like that, because maybe we haven't doped for 20 years or whatever, but you know, we all make mistakes.
Is there, I'm going to put you on the spot, is there a national figure out there that you think is a good example of an ethically emotional person that, you know, really displays these 5 principles?
I'm a little embarrassed to tell you the first thing that popped up into my head, but and I may be alienating your viewers by telling you this. Now people are leaning into their TV. What's he going to say? I can't even believe I'm about to say this, but I just finished his biography. It's autobiography. Peter Criss, the drummer of Kiss.
Really?
Yes, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
You know, it's ever since Keith Richards wrote his memoir called Life, there's been this bum rush to get every possible rock memoir out there. And it's the same story, right? The rise to fame, the sex, the drugs, alcohol abuse, then you fall off the wagon, you have the divorces, and then you come clean. But what I was really surprised and what I found really inspirational is that he was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Really?
And instead of covering it up, literally and figuratively, he decided he wanted to help other men recognize that there's not only no shame in coming to terms with this and getting treated for it, there's everything right to do in doing that. So he's become, in the last phase of his life, a force for good by using his misfortune to help educate a lot of men in this country and the world who otherwise would never see a doctor about, you know, discovering a lump in their breast. So I'm not saying that he's a saint, and he recognizes that he's not, but I was just really struck by at the end of his story that this is how he's going to spend, you know, the remainder of his life doing that.
That's interesting.
How does that, by the way, when you hear that, you think like, the ethics guy, what the heck are you doing? Talking about the drummer of Kiss.
Well, you know, it's a great story, and it's a great example of someone taking their own misfortune and rather than wallowing in it, doing something good with it.
Yes.
And in this case, educating people about breast cancer in men.
And remember Betty Ford in the 70s when she came forward with talking about breast cancer, it encouraged a lot of women to get checked up, and it actually resulted in a lot of treatment for things that otherwise would have been diagnosed. Same with Ronald Reagan's colon cancer. He did the same thing.
Yeah. It's good. It makes you feel good when you see our national figures taking.
Yes.
You know, they're in a position of some level of notoriety and authority, and you know, use it for good.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about. You have an ethics IQ test.
Yes, I do. Did you take it, by the way?
I haven't yet.
Oh.
But I'm going to after we're done with this interview. Tell us a little bit about that.
You know, people love to take tests, and they love
to see where they rank.
To see where they rank, how they're doing, and there are tests for every possible. How well can you decorate your house? How well can you tie your shoes? How well can you cook a vegetarian meal for your family? Something like that. But there haven't really been tests to test your ethical intelligence. And I recognize that the multiple choice format is very limiting, and obviously there's a lot of nuance and ambiguity and room for discussion, but I thought at least putting something basic out there as a springboard for discussion would work. And this is when I look at the Google Analytics that drive people to my website, it's the ethics quiz. That's what, because you take this quiz and then you find out how you rank what may be according to the principles and my own analysis, and I may be wrong, but according to this analysis, why this course of action would be better. For example, going to work with the flu. Or, yes, when you have the flu, is it right to go to work? And you may feel like you're being a team player and you're not letting the team down, but in fact, you're not only putting other people at risk of harm, you're making it harder for you to get better. So that is not the ethically intelligent thing to do, even though people do it all the time. Now, you don't have the flu right now.
No.
Good.
I hope I don't.
But if you did, what would you do?
Knowing my coworkers, I'd stay home, because if I did come to work, they'd say, "Please stay home. We don't want this."
Are there any other reasons? And that's praiseworthy that you're concerned about. But are there any other reasons besides not wanting to infect your coworkers that would prompt you to stay home?
That would be the biggest one.
This is the missing piece, and this is why I think ethics is such a turnoff for people, because it seems so focused on what we owe to other people, and that's part of it, but it's also about what we owe to ourselves.
Sure.
And going to work with the flu is not a compassionate way to treat yourself.
Yeah, you're not doing yourself any favor by going to work.
Exactly.
You're not going to get any better.
Staying home and working is not doing yourself any favor. It will take you longer to get better. If you are entitled to stay home and rest and watch Andy Griffith reruns and drink broth and anything it'll take to get you better. That's the ethically intelligent response. So that's one of the ethics quiz questions that I think can show that some answers are better than others.
Okay. So you've given these two speeches at Eastern. You speak all over the country. What are some of the key things that you want, we just have a few minutes left, that you want people to take away after they've heard you speak or after they've watched our show today?
It's very simple. I want people to be inspired to be the best they can be. And when people come up to me afterwards and said, "You inspired me. Yeah, I knew these principles already, but now I really want to put them to good use and to make them front and center." That's really what it's about. I want to take people on not just an intellectual journey, but an emotional journey. And by the end they say, I mean, have you ever seen a film where by the end of it you say, "I want to be like that. I want to do that." Those sorts of things. For me, it was Schindler's List. You know, that moment where he cries at the end. I hope I'm not giving anything away for people who haven't seen it, but when he says, "I could have done more to help people," and you get goosebumps because you say, yes, maybe, but look how much good you did for people.
Right.
And that's just one of many films, you know, one could mention about being inspirational. So that's setting a pretty high bar. I want people to feel about my talks the way people feel about Liam Neeson in Schindler's List. But you have to, you know, a person's reach should extend his grasp.
So what's next for you? More books, more speaking?
Well, right now I'm flying to Cincinnati to speak to Xavier University, and then Montana, and then Canada twice. And sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I say, what city is this? But fortunately I haven't gone out and said, hello, Cleveland, and it's Charleston, Illinois. Yes, it's not walking the earth, I guess, but flying around the earth, talking about this, and writing some new books. And, you know, it's just a joy. I cannot believe I get paid, and the check's usually clear, you know, to do something I'm so passionate about.
Well, that's great.
Except for the, you know, the hassle of getting through through airport security.
Yes.
And the indignation of having to get dressed not once but twice. Other than that, it's a privilege. It's a very privileged life. I'm very fortunate.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Now, when we see him on the Today Show, we can say, I've met him in person, and he was here at WEIU. Dr. Weinstein.
That's okay.
Weinstein. I got it wrong.
It's like Rupert Pupkin, often misspelled and mispronounced, but that's okay.
All right. Thank you for coming to Charleston for WEIU.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.